I guess the first thought I have, Connor, first of all, this is like my first time doing all this.
Okay. It's a lot.
It's
It'll
a lot.
become even more crazy in about 24 hours.
Well, so like, we're gonna be like sizing guys up? We're gonna be like, oh, he's bigger than I thought he was.
The whole, everything.
Like everything, just all looks.
Yeah,
thrown
like,
against
that's
air.
what a
Yeah.
350-pound defensive tackle that'll run a 4.8 will look like when they walk by you.
I feel like that will be the most jarring part.
It always is.
Because you're like, okay, you see the numbers, you watch on TV, and then you look at the physical specimens, and you're like, how did someone this big run that fast?
Move like that,
Yeah.
or just the presence alone. Because you
Yeah.
think about it, there are also wide receivers or running backs that are built somewhat like normal people that have to get away from these guys and what tackling, getting tackled by them would feel like. So the combine it checks every box. Like every coach and GM will be here today speaking, and then you get all the players across 4 days, not just the workouts, but you get to hear all of them speak as well, kind of see what they're made of. So it's really like the mecca of the NFL offseason.
Yeah, it feels that way. And we were catching up with friends last night, and someone compared it to like a class reunion. Also feels that way from a media standpoint.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into all of that. We're also going to have more interviews on the Rushing the Field feed later this week from Indianapolis. I want to talk about the draft big picture before we dive into your individual takes and analysis. I've heard multiple people say it's like kind of a meat and potatoes draft because, maybe we're not talking about the quarterbacks like we did last year. And maybe there's even more debates about, the order of 1, 2, 3 than usual, where you kind of say, oh, the draft usually starts at 4 or 5 or whatever it is. Do you view it that way? Meat and potatoes, like offensive line, defensive line, like the guys that actually hold these teams together?
I do, but that doesn't. I think some people look at that and think like, oh, it's bland then, and it makes me laugh a little bit because the team.
I love meat and potatoes.
Meat and potatoes is great for football. Meat and potatoes is great in real life.
Yeah.
So it's funny to me because the team that just won in a blowout in the Super Bowl, their season was really built on running the football and the defensive line. Like that was the identity of the Philadelphia Eagles. And then everybody looks at this draft and they're like, okay, where are the strengths? The defensive line, the running back group, and I actually think the offensive line group is deeper than people realize. And tight end is really, really good, which is such a huge part of running the ball in the NFL as well. So it's funny. I think some people are using that to classify this as like, oh, it's a boring draft. It doesn't have stars, but it has what helps teams actually win football games across multiple units.
Yeah, I feel like it's because, again, you don't have a bunch of quarterbacks. You're not going to see a bunch of quarterbacks drafted like last year. And I would say the receivers, not as flashy either.
I agree.
Like, I'm with you on the tight ends. I want to get your thoughts on the running backs as well. But that's part of what it feels like. It feels like there's a bunch of edge guys that are going to go in the first round,
For sure.
like linemen. Questions for the offensive linemen, and we're going to get into some of them, are like, can they stay at tackle? Are
That's
they going
the
to be an
big one.
offensive line? So that's where measurements actually come into
Without
play,
a doubt.
right? Because
Yep.
people are going to want to see their wingspan.
So most teams by now have thresholds, right? So, and it doesn't mean if a guy doesn't meet a threshold, he's off the board, he's undraftable. It might mean that you can kind of dock him on your grade, or, hey, our position coach typically, one for example, usually like your NFL tackles to have 34-inch arms, right? And it can range, but you just run the metrics across the NFL, say the last 20 years of guys that have, success rate or guys that have not worked out. And there's a lot. If you're a corner and you run a 4.6, good chance that it's just not going to work out for you. Or they're outliers, like look at Kamari Lassiter from last year who had a really good rookie season. Yeah, there's outliers, but typically you're trying to play the odds, right? Yeah. You can compare it to betting, whatever you want it. Like there's odds at this that are analytically, that match the analytics. So that's a really good one, is arm length for tackles and arm length for defensive linemen, because it's how you can kind of counter off of blocks, how you can use your length to win. So yeah, NFL teams, they have real thresholds, and some guy like Will Campbell's a great player, right? And he is somebody that had a great career at LSU. I think he's the best offensive lineman in the draft, but realistically, he's going to come in with shorter arms at this event, and all the combo around a great football player.
Is how long his...
Can he play tackle because of his arm length?
Yep.
And that'll be split for NFL teams, and that, I don't think it'll dictate how high he goes, but you remember Peter Skoronski from a couple years ago.
Right.
That was a similar conversation. He was probably a no-brainer top 10 player in the draft. He falls a little bit and goes to guard right away, even though he was a great college tackle.
Right, and you'd feel better about using an early pick on a tackle, right?
Always, yeah.
Like way more, or not way more, but more valuable.
Without a doubt. It also goes by, you just look at the markets in the NFL based on finances, right? What are the position groups that get paid an enormous amount of money? Take away quarterback, because that's in a stratosphere of its own, but the wide receiver market has exploded. The offensive tackle market has exploded. And pass rushers, that market is gigantic. So you look at things and go, okay, well, am I going to take a great guard in the top 15 of this draft? Maybe. You will. That conversation will be around a guy like Tyler Booker from Alabama. But I can go out and maybe sign a starter for $9 million in the NFL instead. And realistically, the positions I named before, Nicole, quarterback, wide receiver a little bit, but not too much, especially tackle. They don't make it to free agency.
Right.
So it's find your own, right? It was a really interesting quote not that long ago from Duke Tobin of the Bengals when people asked him about T. Higgins potentially getting to free agency, and he said teams can go find their own wide receivers, right? So teams don't want to let these guys go. They want to extend them. So if there's no supply in the free agent market, you better be here and find them in the draft, or else you're in big trouble.
It's completely. And this is something that's so different with college when you just like have a bad offensive line or don't have tackles, can't protect the quarterback, you can't do anything about it, right? Because you don't have a draft. You don't have free agency.
Wait till the national
Portal.
signing day and the portal.
Portal now,
right.
so you're kind of stuck for the season.
Yep.